Good evening all, and welcome. Before the video begins, I would like to give a shout out to Forgotten Lives. I narrated a very interesting story over there, and it is one that I think most of you will find incredibly interesting. It's about a Russian woman who was one of Russia's most notorious criminals. She did some pretty shady things, not to mention some of them being absolutely awesome, in my humble opinion. And if you want to check it out, I'll leave the link at the end and in the description. But anyway, for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. For context, my dad grew up with this man called Bruce and considered him one of his best friends. Bruce was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in his late teens, and my dad, being the kind and caring soul that he is, stepped in to be his guardian. I say that lightly. I mean, he always helped Bruce out when he was going through an episode. Growing up, Bruce was always around. I saw him as another father figure in my life. He lived in a small town 2 hours away from my city, where we also had a holiday home, so he was constantly coming up to stay at ours. He was kind, calm, and patient, as well as being an amazing artist. Almost yearly, Bruce went through phases of refusing to take his medication. This then triggered an intense manic episode, some of which I have witnessed, and are frightening to see for a young child who only knew this person as quiet and calm. He would do and say things far beyond his control, and couldn't quite grasp reality. And that unfortunately is where it begins. I was 12 years old when this happened, so it was around 10 years ago, but still feels fresh in my mind. Every summer, my family and I would take a trip down to our beach house, which was Bruce's town. Our little house was a one-room unit, where us kids would usually sleep in the lounge, but for Christmas, our parents brought a massive 3-person tent for us to sleep on the front lawn. So while my parents slept up in the house, we got the tent. A week before my dad had to drive back up for work, he got a strange call from Bruce, although at the time, I didn't know what it was about. I could see the concerned look on my dad's face as he told Bruce, "No, I won't do that." After further arguing, my dad hung up and murmured to my mum about something. "I'll sort it out," and my dad left. I asked what was wrong because my mum's expression turned into worry. She shrugged it off and told me not to concern myself, and that was that. Later that night, I heard from my mum talking to my auntie that Bruce was refusing to take his medication unless my dad withdrew money. From what I know, my dad's in charge of Bruce's finances and his bank account because Bruce has a meth problem. Bruce has a son who is trying to stay clean from it, and after Bruce tried and failed to get his son to buy him some meth, he turned to my dad, who also refused. I totally get it. He's an adult and can make his own choices, but my dad didn't want to enable his drug problem. My dad stepped into being a guardian of Bruce, so that's his job. This is where everything goes sour. Bruce started threatening to stop taking his medication ever again, and that he hadn't been for weeks. And then he started threatening to harm my brothers and I. He said to my parents, "They trust me. It would be easy." My mum freaks out and tells him that she's calling the cops. The police arrived at his house to see the whole property was empty. He had fled and was hiding somewhere that made everyone uneasy. Nothing really happened in the next coming weeks. and it was time for my dad to drive back up to the city for work. Mum felt okay staying down with us, and of course the 3 kids were oblivious to all the commotion that was going on. So, we were too. Everything is good for the first few nights. Dad's gone, and that's when it starts going downhill. It's around 3:30 a.m. My brothers and I are sound asleep in the tent. My mum up in the house is also fast asleep when she wakes up to a booming of texts from Bruce. They're all blank, but since this is the first time hearing from Bruce since he threatened her kids, my mum is now wide awake and in full-blown panic mode. Bruce rings her, and she answers. He doesn't reply, instead breathes heavily on the phone for 10 seconds before hanging up. The second time is the same. Mum asks where he is, but he hangs up on her. He rings for the 3rd time, saying, "Back deck," before hanging up. My mum hears a loud bang from the back of the house and quickly calls the police. The only way to the back of the house is by going through the front lawn, where my brothers and I were sleeping. I don't remember much, except being shaken awake by my dad's best friend, who my mum called in tears, and coming into the house to see 3 police officers standing around. My brothers and I were now wide awake because we were curious as to everything going on. And then this happened. My dad came back down for us with the news. Bruce's son had come up to him in the city to apologize and confess that he was told to come to end the life of our family in exchange for a large sum of money. My dad was in shock and rushed back down. Bruce was back in hiding again. My mum let everyone who knew him and was close to him know what happened, and if he did come to them, was to let the police know who will immediately detain him, as he was considered dangerous and mentally unstable. The crappiest thing was one of her supposedly best friends who knew him let him stay at hers instead of calling the authorities. Side note, they have only started talking again recently after my mum forgave her. As the summer started to wind down, we returned to the city to find a few terrifying things. My mum and dad came home to one of their bathroom windows smashed and dirty footprints everywhere. For some reason, nothing out of the ordinary had happened until my older brother, an avid cockatiel lover, went out to check our aviary birds to find they were all missing. Not one was there, and we assumed they must have escaped and flown away, until Dad got a nasty surprise opening our barbecue to see that all 10 of them had been cooked alive. My parents can't prove it was him, but after all that has happened in regards to Bruce, it probably was, especially after finding out what Mum's friend did. To make matters worse, our neighbor heard and saw what was going on when we were broken into, but didn't bother to ring the police or even let us and my parents know. We were furious. She made an awful excuse about being home alone and never having witnessed something like this. So, to Bruce, a man I knew was another father figure in my life. You may have bipolar disorder, and you can't help that. But after what you put my family and I through, I hope we never meet again. When I was younger, my older cousin lived with us for a bit because she was having behavioral problems at home. My parents had to go at night to pick someone up from the airport, so they left my brother and I with her. My brother and I were both in bed in my room at this point, as I think it was a school night, and she was up in the other room doing homework. But she finished up, so came into our room to lay down with us. But as soon as she opened the door, our house alarm started going off. She quickly shut the door and came over to tell me to be quiet before going back to close the door since it didn't have a lock. My brother, who's a year older than me, woke up very confused, and the alarms were going off, and we were all scared out of our minds and couldn't even call for help because her phone was taken away and we were too young to have one. Our only option was the landline, the one in the kitchen and the one in my parents' bedroom. So we all get ready at the same time and run into my parents' room and lock their door. My cousin checks their bathroom and closet to make sure no one's hiding there before calling my parents to let them know what's happening. They say they're only 2 minutes away and not to worry, but let me tell you, those were the longest 2 minutes of my life. After all is said and done, we find out through the alarm company that the window in my parents' room is what tripped the alarm, and that's the room we went to. To this day, my parents are convinced she was just trying to sneak in a boyfriend or something, but I'm certain someone was trying to rob the place or worse, and got scared off by the alarm because of how completely terrified my cousin looked. I've had more than my fair share of creepy encounters, but this one was particularly dramatic. One where I really did feel my life was in danger. I was on holiday visiting family in South Asia. Having been born and brought up in England, a lot of things over there are quite foreign to me. We, my parents and I, were staying at my uncle's apartment. My aunt and uncle were at work, and my parents had gone away for a day trip to visit relatives in a neighboring town, leaving me at home with my 2 cousins, Hamish and Adam. Adam was 8 years old at the time, and Hamish was 3, and I was about 13. Adam and Hamish always argued about everything. If one wanted a particular cereal for breakfast, an argument would break out over breakfast choices. Adam is stupid for wanting Cocoa Pops. My Shreddies are so much better. I'm not even going to sit here and eat while he eats. Anyway, that sort of stuff. While playing with a toy, let's make the doll swim in the lake. No, it's not a lake, it's the sea. And so on and so forth. I was very used to them disagreeing and squabbling, and couldn't remember any time when they were in harmony, especially over playtime. This might seem like a digression, but it's relevant to this story. On this particular day, Hamish was in the living room, building a Lego boat he had been working on for a few days now. Adam had gone outside to play with his friends on the street. He'd left the door slightly ajar so that he could come and go. It was a hot and humid day as usual, so I went to take a shower and was sitting in my room drying my hair, when Hamish came running in tears. "Tashina, my boat, it's broken." "What?" "My Lego boat, someone stepped on it and broke it." "Oh." He grasped my hand and led me to the living room where the boat was snapped. He was upset. It had been his pride and joy, and so I commiserated and reassured him that not all hope was lost and that it shouldn't take too long to fix. I thought he must have broken it himself by accident, perhaps stepping on it and not realizing he had been working on the floor with the boat sitting in the living room rug. With Hamish finally placated and back to work on his boat, I returned to my room, and a few minutes passed without incident. I could hear Hamish moving around, and I heard Adam come back inside and go to the living room. I got a book and curled up on the bed. It was a lazy, drowsy sort of day. And then, all of it was shattered. Adam and Hamish came charging into my room and was tripping over each other, screaming my name. Hamish ran to me, and Adam paused to slam on the bedroom door to close it behind him. "There's a man in our living room. He's wearing a mask, and he had a knife. He must have been the one who broke my boat." "Wait, what?" I look at the pair of ashen faces, completely solemn. "Are you playing some sort of game?" "No, he's wearing a horrible, scary mask, and he has a knife." if they were play acting, and if this was some sort of pretend game. "Where is he?" "In the living room," Adam said, pointing. "He's wearing a mask?" "Yes, like a Halloween mask with a big scary smile on it." "Smile showing teeth," said Hamish, nodding along furiously. "And a knife," said Adam. "A big knife," said Hamish. They looked entirely serious and terrified, looking at me with their upturned, earnest and pleading faces. I think more than anything, it was the fact that they agreed upon the description of this man and what he was carrying that really cemented upon me that they were telling the truth. If this had been some sort of pretend game, they would have disagreed by now, trying to outdo each other in what he was wearing, or perhaps the weapon he was carrying. Instinctively, I went to the door. I wasn't sure why, or to achieve what purpose. I still wasn't scared. I knew they were telling the truth. But could there be an innocent explanation? They were overexcitable kids. My hand went to the door handle. "No," said Adam in a hiss, as they both came running towards me, their hands clawing at me. "Don't go there." "Wait. Okay, let me get this straight. He was in the living room." They nodded. "What was he doing? How did you manage to escape? Did he threaten you?" "I was sitting on the sofa watching TV," said Adam. "Hamish was on the floor with his boat. The man came in and we saw the knife." "What happened then? Was he pointing it at you?" "No, it was just in his hand. As soon as we saw him, we ran and came to you." The living room has 2 doors. One that leads to a corridor that basically snakes around the front of the building, and the other one that leads to a corridor to the inside of the apartment. The boys had taken this latter doorway, with a man presumably standing by the first one. The story did indeed make sense. It had come so suddenly and was taking me a while to actually process the seriousness of what they were telling me, that there was an intruder inside the apartment with a knife, and I was the oldest, so I was in charge. They had to come to me for protection. Oh God, what to do? Okay, let's not panic. We need to call the cops. Mobiles were still uncommon in this era. The only phone in the apartment was the landline, and luckily it was right outside my room. It was on the table in the corridor facing the door to my room. However, it wasn't a cordless phone, so if the cord was long enough, I might be able to grab the whole thing and pull it inside and close the door. I rehearsed it in my mind. I need to get the phone so we can call the police. "No, the man will get you," said Hamish, clinging at my arm. "He might be in the corridor," said Adam. We were all slightly whispering. "Well, we can check," I said, my hand going for the handle. "No," hissed Adam, as he grabbed my hand, insisting it was dangerous. And I told them I'd just take a peek. Adam, eventually, and reluctantly agreed. I turned the handle slowly, and my stomach felt tight as I did so. The tension of the boys standing next to me didn't help the matters. When it was slightly ajar, I pressed my face into the gap and looked around. The corridor was dark and empty. "Okay," I said, turning to face the boys. "There's no one there. I'm going to sneak out and grab the phone and come back, okay? As soon as I get back in with the phone, you close the door behind me. It's only a few steps to the phone. It'll just take a few seconds, don't worry." Adam was a mess, wringing his hands, pleading with me not to go. Hamish stood stoic, nodding, and I pulled the door open further and stepped out. Hamish and Adam crowded into the space I had just vacated, peering out the doorway to watch me. As I stepped outside into the empty, quiet corridor, I began to feel silly. Could this just be the boys' active imagination? Had they seen something on TV and become convinced it was real? Maybe I was just being stupid. Maybe there was no one there, and I was feeling much calmer and incredulous about the whole situation. Still, it was possible, but better to be safe than sorry. I would take the phone inside and call my uncle to come home. I stepped up to the table, took the phone, quickly assessing it, and tugged on the cord that plugged it into the wall. Yes, it should be long enough to take inside. I picked the whole thing up and looked up. He was standing there wearing a clown-like grinning mask, knife in hand. I don't think I need to tell you it was the most stomach-dropping, terrifying moment. The shock and fright felt like something had just smacked me in the face. I couldn't scream. I dropped the phone and just leapt back to the door, slamming it into Adam and Hamish as I did so. All three of us banged the door shut. Adam and Hamish stood leaning against the door, and I dragged my bed in an adrenaline-fueled frenzy. There was no lock on the door. Would the bed be strong and heavy enough to hold it? I began piling everything I could onto the bed to make it even heavier. Adam and Hamish wordlessly joined in. The books on the bookshelf, all my bags, my suitcase, my clothes, the clock, everything. And then we all sat down on the bed, clambering onto it, leaning against the upper part of the door to make sure it wouldn't open. Now that we were all still, we could just look at each other. Adam began to cry. He was bawling in a thin, whiny voice. "Oh my God, we're gonna die," he wailed. No, we're not gonna die," I said, though my heart was still pounding painfully against my chest, and I felt like I was gonna be sick. Hamish was just sitting quietly next to me, his little hands folded across his chest. "We're gonna die," Adam said again. I told them to calm down. I thought about what we could do. We couldn't stay here forever. We could just wait until he leaves. I don't think I'll ever forget the image. Little Hamish, 3 years old, sitting next to me looking solemn, his legs out in front of him, clad in those little jeans, with his hands clasped in his lap, his back leaning against the door, and Adam on the other side of me, his knees pulled up to his chest, tears streaming down his face, making whimpering noises. All of us in a row barricaded against the door, and we could hear footsteps in the corridor occasionally. The time pressed on, but our tension didn't wane. With every passing second, we expected to hear a thud on the door, and the man trying to get in. Thankfully, it didn't happen. We eventually heard my aunt come in talking in the corridor, wondering where we were and calling us. It was amazing, but there was a tinge of dread in case the man was still in the apartment, in case he might attack her. Hastily running outside, we told her what happened and searched the place, emboldened by the presence of an adult, but there was no sight of the man. The frustrating thing was, though my uncle and aunt, when they got home from work, didn't believe us at all, she thought we were flat out lying for entertainment, which I found particularly undermining, given that at 12 years old, and mature enough for my age, I would never make something up as serious as that. First she laughed and rolled her eyes, waving us away when we persisted and repeated, insisting it did really happen and that we were telling the truth. She eventually grew tired and told us to stop. I still find it astonishing how lightly they can take the complaints of children. We were shaken up for the rest of the day and feeling very indignant and having been just shooed away after something so terrifying had happened. When my parents got back, we told them, and it was some solace that they did indeed take us seriously. They knew that it was completely out of character for me to dream up or lie about something like that. My aunt and uncle, however, still didn't agree. Later in the evening, after we were getting ready to go out to dinner, we heard my aunt cry out in surprise, and my uncle rushed to see what happened. It turns out all of her jewellery was gone, and that was when they finally did indeed believe that we had been telling the truth, and there was an intruder. This happened to me when I was about 14. I was best friends with this girl called Robin. We've long since parted ways, but I used to stay over at hers all the time. Robin was an only child to an older couple, both roughly about 60. Her house was old, and the bedrooms were quite small. She had a thing for decorating her room in spooky things. It was overcrowded with trinkets and clothes, which looked really cool. But it meant that after we were done watching trashy 90s anime, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I could go to sleep in this spare room, or I would risk suffocating under a pile of gothic teddy bears and Pokemon on her floor. One evening her parents went out to the local pub just down the street with some old friends, so I stayed over. It was great, free house for just the two of us, and they made sure we had all the junk food we could want. They were really sweet and always made sure we felt safe before leaving. I should also mention that they never brought guests home, especially when their daughter had a friend over. For the most part, I had a great night. When it was time to go to sleep, I went into what I call my room because I was there so often. It was small and just fit a wardrobe, dresser and double bed, which, considering how I had a single bed and shared a room with my sister, it was a luxury. We would usually spend hours sending each other DS PictoChat messages until one of us fell asleep. I curled up into bed and passed out pretty quickly. Sometime at 4 a.m., I awoke to someone fidgeting at the door handle. At first I was a bit confused, as Robin would almost always message me through PictoChat if she was going to come into my room. The door was rattling at this stage, and I was a bit freaked. It lasted a few minutes. The rattling subsided, and I rolled over and tried to calm myself down, thinking it might have been her dad or mum making sure the door was closed. I don't know. I was confused. I'm not sure at this point if I fell asleep or what, but I didn't hear anyone entering the room, and then I heard this splashing sound. I remember thinking it was really loud and clear, and as the seconds went by I realized this wasn't part of the dream or something. I was actually hearing it. So as I was facing the wall, I rolled my head around as silently as I could, and I could see this very tall man next to my bed facing the corner. He was so close to me. He was at least 6'3" tall, had thick, black, short hair, and was incredibly pale and toned. He looked to be in his early 30s, and he was wearing nothing but a pair of black boxer shorts. There was no way this could have been her dad. While he was almost as tall as this guy, her dad was visibly older, had silver hair, and the top of his head was bald. There was no way anyone could confuse him with this guy. I was in shock. I had no idea what was happening, and I remember feeling my heart in my mouth. I didn't know what to do. I just stared in shock for a few seconds, and then as quietly as I could, I turned back around and pretended to be asleep. I remember trying to control my breathing so he wouldn't notice. Eventually he left, and I was aware, for what felt like an hour, too afraid to move. I don't know who this guy was, and if he was still outside my door. Did he see me? If he saw me, what would he do? I didn't hear anyone else in the house, and there was no talking, and the walls of the house were paper thin. When I eventually worked up the nerve, I darted into Robin's room and broke down. I was panicking, and she was laughing at me, saying I was being ridiculous, and that I was lying, that I was just having a nightmare. She told me to go back to bed, and I refused. I didn't feel safe. She rolled her eyes, and we both went into the room. She looked around and suddenly started shrieking. She had just stepped into a puddle of piss. I told you. It was everywhere. It was on the wardrobe, on the dresser, and soaked into the carpet. At this point, she was just as confused as I was. Even so, it was 5 a.m., so she grabbed my pillow and blanket from my room, and I gladly took my chance with the Teddy avalanche and slept on her floor. The next morning, I remember being incredibly wary of her dad. There were no other male figures around, and they weren't the kind of people to have guests over, especially when their daughter had guests over. So, I directed my fear and confusion at him. I knew it wasn't him though, but at that point I was just so anxious around any kind of male figure. I remember sitting around the breakfast table and Robin was still not sure what to make of it. Somehow part of her didn't want to believe me, even when she saw the evidence for herself. I didn't say anything to her parents, neither did she. I went home scared and confused out of my mind, and out of my friends and family, no one seemed to believe me. It wasn't until recently that I retold the story to a group of friends, and my best friend, who I was friends with at the time, reacted with, "Wait, that was real? We all thought you were just making that up." Later on, my sister told me that the houses in the area were connected through the attics, and you can get from one house to the other. Maybe someone crawled through there and had gotten in. But why were they almost naked? Why did they know I was there? I never really understood what happened. Needless to say, I never slept in that room and never slept alone in that house again. I remember the day very vividly. I was in first grade, my sister in preschool. My dad was out at work for the day, and my mum, who's a stay-at-home mum, was home with my sister and I. My mum had gone upstairs to shower, since it was morning, while my sister and I were downstairs on the couch watching Bob the Builder. My sister went outside to the car to grab something. The way my house is set up is that our family room, where we were watching TV, connects to our kitchen, which connects to our garage. In order to get to the car outside, my sister opened up the door leading to the garage, then opened up the garage door by pushing a button. She then walked out to the car, retrieved whatever she needed, and came back in. I guess she didn't push the button to close the garage door, and she must have left the door leading inside from the garage unlocked. Well, she was 4, and she didn't think anything of it. About a half hour elapses, and my mum comes downstairs frantically with a towel around, asking if we had taken her jewellery from her upstairs bedroom. Certainly not me. Although I was a 6-year-old girl, I wasn't interested in jewellery. My sister assured my mum she didn't take it either. Then my mum had asked if I was upstairs at all while she was washing up. No, I was downstairs watching TV with my sister. Why? She told me she had heard footsteps, and whilst was in the shower, had called out my name, but we didn't respond. At this point, I was a very good whistler, and my parents knew that I could whistle. My sister, however, couldn't blow a sound. Well, if it wasn't my sister and it wasn't me, who could have taken all her jewellery from my mum's jewellery box, even the one which she had lost the key to? My mum wrangled my sister and I outside the house in panic, still with only a towel over her, and she phoned the police and my dad. She asked my sister, "Are you sure you didn't take it? Or that your friends and you yesterday didn't play with it?" Again, my sister said no. A police officer came and searched the house and my mum's room. Being 6, I was curious and confused, so I asked some of the officers what they were doing, and kindly they explained the procedure. We never ended up finding out who the criminal was. They must have come through the garage door, which meant they would have passed my sister and me sitting on the couch. Luckily, they only wanted jewellery and not to take children, because the committer could have easily taken us as well while my mum was busy showering. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if they'd have taken us. Many of our friends and family told my parents that it could have been the painter we hired. We were getting the house painted that summer, and we trusted the man painting our house, so we would leave him alone while we went out for lunch or on our boat. Since the robbery, I've been skittish home alone. We got an alarm system, better locks, and a guard dog that same year. I would have terrible thoughts after the experience that a man would come through my window and hurt me, or sneak into the house again. My dad would have to show me videos of our breed of guard dog attacking people with protective clothes on, so that I could see my dog would defend us. To this day, I hate being home alone. The slightest sound sets me on edge, and I'll reach for the nearest bat or anything I could to defend myself while I search the house. My mum also had a tough time afterwards vacuuming the house alone, since she wanted to hear every sound. So to the man that burglarized my home, took all my mother's childhood jewelry and special jewelry, let's not meet again. I live in a small cul-de-sac in the middle of nowhere. The next nearest neighborhood is over 4 miles away. One night a few years ago, we got over 1.5 feet of snow overnight. So far from the main road and on the weekend, I knew that our roads would remain unplowed for quite some time. I went to my back deck door to admire the snow-draped trees and the still heavily falling flurries, when I noticed footprints leading to my door, and then turning around and leaving. I looked and saw that they came from my neighbor's side, and thought that one of their more delinquent kids played a joke as my sledding tube on the rail was popped. I decided I'd wait till later, as it was too early to call their parents. I went on Facebook after scrolling for a bit, and noticed one of my neighbors closer to the entrance posted, "Did someone knock for me or something at the back door?" I immediately called her and told her that I had an idea. I called the first house on the entrance and told him what was going on. He went and checked, and sure enough, they were there too. Everyone started calling everyone else. I called the family at the far end, and they told me there was none there. Then I got a call from my next door neighbor. She called the woman that lives next to the end house, and she said that there were footprints that led to her door, but none that led away. We already called the police at this point, but we now called them back and said it's an emergency. They told us that the roads were still all unplowed, and they can't send a plow truck to clear the way, as they're a privately owned company. The woman was losing it, so one of the husbands, who's a huge bear of the man from across the road, texted her to say he was coming over, to invite her over. He came and she left. We put up one guy's live feed motion recording hunting cameras facing all exits. Nothing came out. At around 7 p.m, a plow truck came, as well as 3 cop cars. The couple she was staying with and her went to her house and stood in the doorway as the police searched. They found nothing, and she begged them to keep looking, so they did. 2 of the cops went into the basement again. This time only one came up. He took her to the side room, and we could hear hysterical crying. Me and a few of the other guys started towards the door when several police confronted us. They told us they found someone hiding under a cover opening in the stairwell that she didn't even know existed. A few minutes later, a scruffy man came out kicking and screaming in cuffs and was led away. In his little camp, they found blankets she just cleaned and put away, in the next room to hers. She stayed in other people's houses for a long time before going back. Even then, she wouldn't stay alone, and sold the house next summer. He turned out to be a thrill-seeking junkie who was on probation for assault against a family member. The cops told us that they feel like he didn't want to stay at his apartment after a fight with his roommate, and drove off in his roommate's car from the county over and got stuck on our unplowed roads. We all were called as witnesses in the case, and he took some electronics from her basement. But we couldn't get him on that since he never left with the stuff. It was about 4 months of court. Anyway, this is why you lock your doors. This happened around 6 months ago. So a little backstory. The way my backyard is, it leads to my garage. My backyard is more of a deck. Anyway, a few weeks prior to this creepy guy, there were a lot of cops in my area. This is a low crime rate town. Nothing big ever happens here. Maybe a stabbing every 3 years or a shooting every 5. And the cops were looking for this creepy guy. So one night I'm home alone. I'm playing some video games in the basement when I hear a loud bang outside near my garage. So I go upstairs to investigate. I look outside and my garage light is on. I think it's my girlfriend just getting home from work. So I'm standing there for about 5 minutes waiting for her to come through the garage door. Nothing. So I call my girlfriend and ask her if she's home. She tells me she won't be home for an hour. I'm in shock now, because I didn't leave that light on. I ended up calling the police. They came by and checked the garage. They told me someone was in there because everything was thrown about, and the cop that came said he would sit outside my house until my girlfriend got home. My girlfriend arrives and the cop bids me goodbye. I thought maybe it was just some kids. So my girlfriend then goes up to bed while I made some food. I ate, went out for a smoke, and get out my light when I looked towards my gate. That's when I heard a noise at my side gate. I look over and there's some mid-40s guy just staring at me. "What are you doing?" I ask. I think I was in shock. He tries to open my gate. I threw my smoke at him and ran into the house and locked the door. I called the cops and told them what happened, and they came by again 5 minutes later. They told me no one was around, but believed he was there because the gate was wide open. I haven't seen him since, but this sure scared me. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. So I've got a little update for you guys. You might have noticed that today's recording sounds a little bit different, or maybe a bit more like before. You see, we moved house, and I now have a little office/studio room where I do my recording. However, the room is very echoey. So, in order to combat that, when we received deliveries of furniture and stuff, the boxes they came in I put in here to use as temporary soundproofing, which was working. However, due to the fact that this cardboard started to smell, my mum looked some stuff up on the internet and found out that certain recycled material cardboards actually have some toxic compounds that are not so good to breathe in. Basically, the cardboard was reeking because it was doing damage to our health. How great. So yeah, I've had to dispose of all the cardboard, and the echo's back. We bought a rug because we thought that would dampen some of the echo, but all that it's done really is feel really nice on my toes. It hasn't really done much. I think I need to buy some soundproofing, but it's quite expensive. In any case, I'm going to try and get something to make this room less echoey. I've already put stuff in it, but it's just the high ceilings make it sound really echoey, which is annoying because I don't want the quality of the videos to go down. In any case, I am actively trying to work on getting this sorted out, but just bear in mind that it's going to sound a little bit echoey for a while. Anyway guys, that is the news from me. As always, a huge thank you to all my amazing patrons whose names can be seen on screen. You guys are amazing, and it really does mean the world to me. If any of you would like to be patrons or consider joining Patreon, for as little as $1 a month, you could really help me out. And it would, of course, mean the world to me. And you get some awesome prizes for joining as well. Alright then, well, with that, I'm going to sign off. As I said at the start, don't forget to check out Forgotten Lives. I narrated a really cool story over on his channel, and I think you'd honestly really enjoy it. A really nice segue from tonight's video. So until then guys, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.
This happened last month. I am a 26-year-old male living in Atlanta. I took a side job as an Uber driver. I worked morning shift in a garage so that I can drive Uber at night. I preferred the Uber night shift because of less traffic. Anyways, one night I was finishing up a trip nearby the city mall around 8:30. It was a long summer night. I decided to take one more trip and go home to enjoy my weekend in peace. I waited near the mall to get another trip request, but I kept waiting for 10 or 15 minutes and nothing happened. Being disappointed, I thought to call it a day and return home. I lived in a small cabin at the outskirts. I took the highway and started to drive home. I put on some music and opened the car window. A cool breeze came in and gave me some relief. I lit a cigarette and kept driving in a light mood. I couldn't wait to return home and sleep till noon the next day. Everything was going fine until I reached near the highway tunnel. IMR Highway has a huge tunnel that connects the city with the outskirt area. I was almost near the tunnel. Due to the roads being completely empty, I was driving a bit faster. I was almost 10 to 15 hands distance from entering the tunnel when a man sprinted right in front of my car from the bushes. I pushed the brake so hard that the car stopped, making the tires screech loudly. I got extremely scared, thinking I might have hurt that guy. My eyes kept searching for that man, but he was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, a hand grasped my shoulder from the window. At first, I was scared like hell, but then I got my shit together and looked out the window. I saw a man in his late 30s panting and gasping for air. He said in a broken voice, "Please, help me, please." I realized he is in danger or something similar. I asked him, "What is it? Why are you freaking out like this?" The man looked here and there as if someone is out there looking for him. He then said in a whispering voice, "They are searching for me. Please, you must help me." I got out of the car and looked around. Being honest, there wasn't a single creature nearby. The wide, empty highway was filled with the sounds of crickets chirping. I stared at the tunnel to check if someone was there. The long, hollow tunnel had nothing but yellow lights in it. I asked the man, "Who are you searching for?" The man said in a terrifyingly low voice, "The shadow people. They want me dead." I was out of my mind at that time. I didn't know what the hell this guy was talking about. I said, "Is this some kind of a sick joke? 'Cause I'm really not in the mood right now." The man got inside the car. He sat in the driver's seat and said, "Just drive. We must leave this place right now. They're coming." I got into the car cluelessly. I told the man, "Let me call 911 for you. See, my house is on the other side of the tunnel. You can wait in my car until they arrive." The man then took out a knife from his pocket and held it near my throat. He screamed at me and said, "Just fucking drive. I'm not gonna die at the hand of those shadow people." I didn't know what to do then. I was stronger than the guy. I would have knocked him out immediately if the knife wasn't pointed at me. I said in a low but firm voice, "Listen, let's just relax. I will drive you wherever. You can just take the knife down." The man started screaming again. "Looks like you have no fear of death. If you don't drive right now." Before he could finish the sentence, he looked at the back of the car and became numb. He was staring like a statue. I asked, "What is wrong with you?" "There is no such thing called shadow people. Stop this insanity and let me call 911 for help." The man then said, "Oh my God, they are watching us now." I turned around to see what the hell he was talking about, looking at the backside of the car. I knew it was something made up by his crazy mind, but as I looked, my heart dropped into my stomach. Who are these people? Where did they come from? I swear, guys, there was a group of black shadows standing on the road. Nothing was visible except darkness on their entire body. The man said, "Now do you believe me? Drive, drive!" I said in a panicked voice, "What the hell? Who are these people? Why do they look like that?" The man said, "They're all dead, and now they want my soul." The group started to walk towards our car. I can't explain the horror, because even if there were 10 to 12 people, not a single step taken by their foot made a sound. It felt like they were all kind of floating on the air instead of walking. I tried to start the car engine, but suddenly it didn't start. I tried again and again, but nothing happened. I was completely shocked by how the car suddenly got stuck like this. The man said in a panicked voice, "They're coming now. Please, do something." I twisted the car key one last time, and finally, the car started. I pressed the accelerator, and the car picked up speed. We drove into the tunnel at full speed. I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was no one behind us. I made up my mind to reach home and call 911 to hand over this freak. I was almost close to getting out of the tunnel, just when a group of black shadows appeared from the air and blocked the exit. I hit the brakes and stopped in front of the group. But this time, I didn't turn off the engine. It was hard for me to believe what I was seeing. There were no faces, no color, only black figures standing at some distance from the car. The man then screamed and said, "Why don't you leave me alone?" and started to sob like a child. What happened next still gives me chills to this day. The group suddenly opened up all their eyes at the same time. Now, there were black shadows with huge, wide eyes. Their eyes were blood red and their pupils were pale white. I have never seen such horrifying eyes in my entire life. They all looked at the man beside me and made terrifying growls. For a second, it felt like we were being hunted by a pack of wolves. I broke free from my numbness and pressed the accelerator once again. The car drove into the black shadow group and we passed through them as air blew upon us. As we made it out of the tunnel, I finally saw red and blue lights coming from the other side. I saw 3 or 4 cop cars. I didn't call for 911 yet, but I was out of all senses and rational thinking. I was, in one word, exhausted. The man in the car was still sobbing and muttering, "Please let me go. Leave me alone." I know what I faced that night might seem like a made-up story to some, but if you believe me, then I do have a rational explanation behind that vicious night. The cops came and arrested the man. They told me he is convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment for mass murder in a cathedral. He broke out of prison a few hours back, but it's still really shocking to his state of mind. The cops took him back. I later read about that man. His name was Peter Shipman. One Sunday morning, he entered a church with 2 of his followers. After the prayer ceremony, his followers locked the church door from the inside. They shot 7 men and 5 women who came to attend the prayer. They robbed them and escaped the area. I can't even imagine how vicious that scenario would be when he shot all those people and left their bodies drenched in blood. But somehow, one of his followers drove their car into a tree while escaping. He died as his head bashed against the dashboard of the car. The man and his other follower ran away. Cops arrested the man under a dirty bridge. He was muttering, "Shadow people killed my partners." The body of the second follower was seen floating on the river near the bridge. Investigating officers claimed that the man killed the other partner to acquire the entire share. But if you ask me, I think it was those people's haunting spirits who took revenge on these 3 men. I have started day shifts in Uber now. I have decided to stay home at night for a couple of months to get over this unnatural incident. I don't know when I'll be able to go out at night again without the fear of shadow people. Riley started late from her friend's house. Her feet stumbled as she walked on the sidewalks. She went to attend a party and got really drunk. The streetlight stood on the empty roads. There was no one around her. Her house is still 30 minutes away from here. She somehow stopped under a streetlight and decided to book an Uber for a safe journey home. With gloomy eyes and hazy vision, she booked a cab. The cab number read 2009. Riley waited for a few minutes. She looked around her. The wind and the silence of the night spooked her a bit. She thought to herself, I should have listened to Casey. It was a bad idea to leave for home tonight. All kinds of tense thoughts were going through her mind when a pair of headlights appeared from the end of the road. A white-colored Uber kept coming towards her. Riley immediately gestured with her hand, and the Uber stopped right in front of her. She was so drunk that the bright headlights of the car made her vision even more blurry. She saw the number, 200. Oh, yes, this is it, and got into the cab. The cab driver looked at the rearview mirror and said, Where will you go? Riley replied, 21 IMR Street. Just drive faster. The driver had a weird smile on his face. He started the car and replied, As you wish. Riley closed her eyes and sat for a few minutes. She started to feel a bit fine. As she opened her eyes, she saw they weren't on the highway anymore. The car is now going through an old dusty road. She got a bit tensed and said, Hey, which road is this? The car driver smiled and said, I took a shortcut, madam. Don't worry. Riley checked the GPS, and there was indeed a connecting road at some distance from this one. The driver started to chat with her. So, you live alone, huh? The driver said. Riley replied, Yeah. She was trying to keep the conversation as short as possible, but it seemed like the driver was hitting on her. The driver then said something which ran a shiver down her spine. You know, a beautiful girl like you should not roam in the streets at night all by herself. Haven't you heard of the incidents that are happening these days? Riley suddenly remembered what her friend Sarah told her at the party. They were all sitting on the couch and having drinks when Sarah said, Have you guys heard about the slit-throat killer? Everyone got surprised, including Riley. Sarah went on saying that for the last couple of days, Atlanta cops have said to have discovered 3 bodies from the highways. It seemed like someone slit their throats and dumped their bodies in the bushes on the high road. The cops have no idea who did this, but they are suspecting that there might be a serial killer roaming the streets at night, luring people into traps and slicing their throats. All 3 bodies were found on abandoned, empty roads, pointing out that when they were killed, there wasn't anyone around the area. Riley got all tensed and immediately got charged up. But the horror was yet to unfold in front of her. She received a notification from her Uber app. Until now, she closed the app after getting into the car. The notification read, You have been charged for the canceled booking. Riley opened the app and realized she is stepping into grave danger. Car number 2009 waited for her at the pickup location for almost 15 minutes. But as she didn't show up there, the driver just canceled the ride and left. If her ride has been canceled, then who is this person driving her right now? Riley's stomach dropped in fear. She couldn't speak or say a single word. There is no point of screaming right now because there wasn't a single human being nearby. She can't call someone in front of this guy asking for help. Riley knew this man took her into his car with bad intentions. Is he the slit-throat killer everyone was talking about at the party? Oh my God. Drops of sweat appeared on her forehead. Riley calmed herself down. The only way she can get out of this situation alive is if she uses her brain. The man looked at her from the rearview mirror and asked, Are you all right, madam? Riley smiled and said, Yeah, I'm fine. How long will it take? The man replied in a cold voice, Not much longer. The man's reply felt like something is about to happen at any moment now. Riley was praying to God to save her from this unknown guy and his evil intentions. Riley said to the driver, keeping her voice as calm as possible, What were you talking about back then? The driver said, Oh, You mean the slit-throat killer? Interesting guy, huh? Then the man chuckled. Riley said, Interesting. The cops are going to catch that killer soon. They have already found his victims' bodies. The driver laughed this time and replied, Madam, the cops found his victims because he wanted them to. People like this are insane. You can't spot them out even if they come right in front of you. They wear masks to fool you. The more the driver spoke about this serial killer, Riley's heart started to beat faster. But suddenly, the car started to jerk hugely and the driver pulled the brake. The car stopped, making a loud noise. The driver got out of the car and lifted the hood to check the engine. Riley sat inside quietly. The driver then came close to her window and said, I think there has been some issue in the engine. Wait inside as I check it out. Riley knew the end was near. The man has probably stopped the car on his own and is now making this all up. It's high time, and Riley needs to act. The man again went in front of the car. Riley could hear the metal sound coming from behind the car bonnet. She slowly opened the car door, grabbing her bag in her hand, then tiptoed to the back of the car. There were vast empty fields on one side and deep woods on the other side of the road. The driver said, Looks like we have to think of some other option, madam. I don't think this car will start tonight. If you don't mind, my house is nearby. We can go there and call the mechanics. So this is why this guy took this road, Riley thought to herself. This guy wants to lure her into the woods now and murder her like his 3 other victims. Riley didn't respond. She stood at the back of the car as silently as possible. Riley knew this is her only chance. She started to hear footsteps approaching her. With every step coming close to her, Riley slid to the opposite direction. By the time the driver reached behind the car, Riley went to his side. The driver got shocked as he realized Riley was missing. He said in a confused voice, Madam, madam. Just then, he heard Riley's voice behind him. Yes? What is it? Riley said in a firm voice. Her eyes were wide and big. The driver got spooked for a moment. He then said, we can walk to my house and call for a mechanic. Riley smirked and replied, You are not my ride, no? I booked a cab number 2009. Your cab is 2006. The cab driver smiled awkwardly and said, Well, you asked for a lift and I could use some extra cash, so I thought I'd drive you, but I took a wrong shortcut. Please don't call the cops on me, madam. Riley looked at him and said, For a moment, I thought you were the slit-throat killer. The man laughed awkwardly and said, No, madam. I am definitely not that creepy guy. Please believe me. Riley laughed and said, You are wrong again. It's not a he, but a she. The driver spoke in a terrified face. What? Riley took out her shining knife and lifted her hand. Her innocent face turned into a devil. She smiled in a horrible way and sliced the driver's throat with one slash. The man felt lifeless on the floor while choking on his own blood. She then washed her hands with a water bottle inside her bag. She always carries water with her. It is better to wash off the blood immediately before it dries out on her skin. She pushed the body in the ditch nearby the dusty road with a kick. The high road is 5 minutes walk from there. She reached the highway and booked herself an Uber this time. It was 12 o'clock at night. Riley got inside the car and said to the driver, Drive me home. I feel tired. Next day, the news flashed. New body found near an old dusty road at the town outskirt. Cops are saying this is the 4th victim of the slit-throat killer. The victim was an Uber driver, probably coming home that night as he had no bookings in the record. It seems like the killer stopped his car and lured him into his trap like every other victim. The senior commissioner of police has said they are going to catch this man very soon and put him behind bars for the rest of his life. Riley sipped from her coffee cup and gave an evil smile as she watched the news, sitting on her living room couch. Crazy Uber driver. This is a true incident that disturbed me for a long time. I was in high school back then. One evening, I went to one of my friend's houses for a sleepover. My friend Thomas and I decided to go to a supermarket nearby to grab some beers. Thomas's parents were out of town, so we kinda had the house to ourselves. We planned to drink beer and watch a football match that night. The supermarket was quite far from his house, so we decided to call for an Uber. Our ride arrived within 10 minutes and we hopped in. The driver was polite and well-behaved. He seemed like a man in his late 30s. He was wearing blue t-shirt and black trousers. Thomas started to chat with the guy eventually. I was sitting quietly at the back seat while Thomas was in the front. Being honest, I didn't notice the man's face when we got into the car. We booked the ride as a round trip. After reaching the supermarket, Thomas went inside to get the booze while I stood outside the car waiting for his return. The driver sat inside the car. I lit a cigarette, and for the first time, my eyes went to the rearview mirror. I saw the man's face. There was nothing odd about his face, but as my eyes went to his neck, I got a bit startled. I saw deep scratch wounds on his neck, as if someone scratched him really bad with long, sharp nails. The man suddenly noticed me watching his neck. He immediately pulled his t-shirt collar up to hide them. I thought he might have some pet at his house or whatever it is, it's definitely none of my business. Thomas came back within a few minutes and we got into the car. This time, I noticed a change of behavior in the driver. Thomas again started to chat, but the driver kept cutting the conversation short. Suddenly, it felt like he was no longer interested in talking and just wanted to drop us off as soon as possible. I was sure Thomas felt weird too with this sudden change. He then handed me the beers and said, "Keep it in the back, Smith." I took the plastic bags and I dropped it behind the back seat. The car had a narrow space behind the seat I was on. There was still 15 to 20 minutes to reach home, so I started to scroll through my phone and silence took place inside the car. Everything was going well when suddenly the driver hit the brakes to avoid hitting a cat crossing the road. It created a little jerk and I heard the bottles clink to each other. I wanted to make sure that none of the bottles were broken, so I decided to check the plastic bag. But this time, as I lifted the bag to see inside, something unexpected happened. I saw that the bottom of the plastic was wet with a liquid-like substance. It was dark inside the car and I couldn't see clearly at first. I placed my hand underneath and what I discovered gave me a hell of a shock. The liquid was nothing but blood. I was sure that the blood somehow came from the car itself, so without attracting the driver's attention, I switched on my phone's flashlight and tried to look at the narrow empty space behind. What I saw made my skin crawl in fear. A girl was tied and taped lying inside that empty space. She was hit on the head with a heavy object which caused massive bleeding. I accidentally put the bag on her face and thus her blood left a spot on the bag too. I could tell from her still motionless body that she was dead. Now I understand why the driver had those scratch marks on his neck. This man is a cold-blooded murderer. He just murdered the girl, and before he could get rid of her body, he had to perform his duty to stay away from all kinds of suspicion, so he probably hid her in this empty space. The way her body was kept, it made me immensely disturbed. I mean, anyone could barely fit there. This man is a predator, a freaking devil. I realized I have to inform Thomas about this alarming situation without letting this driver know that I've discovered his terrifying secret. I texted Thomas about the entire situation. I saw his fingers trembling as he read my text. He then looked at the driver. He couldn't believe this man was capable of doing such evil. Thomas and I made a plan because no way are we letting this freak walk free after taking an innocent life. The car took a left turn onto an adjacent street to the highway. Thomas said, "Hey, can you pull over for a sec? I need to pee." We wanted to make sure that the driver was unarmed so that we could tackle him and knock him out. Thomas got out of the car and went behind a bush near the tree. Time passed away, but he didn't come back. I saw the driver getting restless. He turned to me and said, "Where did your friend go? Call him. I have to be somewhere after dropping you off." I called Thomas's phone and it rang inside the car. I told him to leave the phone inside so that I could make my next move. I said in a worried voice, "Oh no, seems like he forgot his phone here. Would you mind giving a check on him? I saw him going towards the bush." The driver reluctantly looked here and there, then started to walk towards the bush. As soon as the man went behind the car, I jumped outside and held him by the neck. The man grunted in surprise and Thomas jumped from the bushes. He tackled him and he started to throw kicks and punches like a jungle cat trapped in a cage. Then he took out a knife from his pocket and slit my hand. I wasn't at all ready for the sudden attack. I screamed in pain as blood started to drip from my hand. Thomas kicked him between his legs from the front and the man fell on the ground in pain. The knife from his hand dropped onto the floor. Thomas then punched him hard on the face. The man passed out immediately and we heard police car sirens coming from a distance. That night, we couldn't watch the match, but none of us regrets that for a second. The cops came and took the man into custody. They sent the girl's body for inspection. We will feel sad forever that we couldn't save that girl. Later, we came to know that this Uber driver picked up this girl from the road. The girl was a drug dealer. The man tried to take advantage of her. This would have led to a big argument, and in the rage of the moment, the man hit the girl with a rod. He couldn't handle the fact that he had killed this girl. He decided to get rid of her body after dropping us off. I still think this man would have escaped if Thomas and I didn't decide to man up about this situation. That night, we did something good, and I want to tell everyone to step up whenever you see someone harassing a woman or a man in front of you. If we decide wisely, we could stop many bad incidents and stop various kinds of crime from happening. The driver is now behind bars. Whenever I go out at night, I keep my eye open now, because the devil masks his face with the veil of innocence.